I am so excited to have with me today sports talk show legend Dan Russell. Dan was a host of Sports Talk Radio for 30 years, Canada's longest running sports talk program. And he's here today to talk about his memoir, Pleasant Good Evening, My 30 Wild and Turbulent Years of Sports Talk. I'm so excited to have you, Dan. Welcome. Congratulations.
Well, thank you. I'm excited to be on with you, Christine. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So what has the response been like since you released the book, your memoir?
Okay, so I released a tweet announcement. I did two teasing tweets, and then 1 week ago, I actually released it and was completely blown away. I was just going to go to bed after I released it and thought, okay, well, I'll wake up tomorrow, there'll be responses. Well, Twitter exploded. It was a tsunami of response. Now, I mean, I don't have a lot of followers, but I somehow had 100,000 impressions on that first tweet announcement. And it was like, whoa. And then before you know it, I had media interviews, and then the book actually went on sale, and people are just like telling me it's the #1 bestseller on Amazon already in 3 different categories. And I'm a rookie, Christine. I don't know any of this author stuff. And so at this moment, I guess I can just say I'm blown away.
Wow, and congratulations. It's supposed to be released on May 20th, but already it's really doing well on Amazon. And you mentioned categories like it's for like sports, history, talk. Is that
But and radio and
right?
biographies and sports and hockey. I mean, they've got again, I've learned so much about this process, categories and keywords and how important they are for the algorithms of the internet, and for Amazon specifically. So I think that you can put in different categories for your particular book, and somewhere somehow maybe you're going to rise up near the top. But the publishing company told me they've never had an author that this soon has been 3 #1 bestsellers in those categories.
Wow. And what event inspired you to write your memoir?
Well, uh, the last few years I was on the show, Christine, I often said, yeah, kind of flippantly, you'd be taking calls and somebody would ask me something, and I wouldn't have time to get into it, but I said, one day I'll put it in my book. One day I'll put it in my book. In the back of my mind, I kind of thought maybe. One thing, Christine, I was a meticulous note taker. And let me just explain. I did nearly 8,000 shows, and I have a diary for every single show I did. So that means every hour of every show, so a 3-hour show, I could look back on any date from June of 1994 and see who was on in the particular hour. Were they in studio? Were they on the phone? Did we take calls? What was the topic? How was the response? What was the open phones like? So I had all that. I also kept journals of all my comings and goings. So all key meetings that I went to. If I had a lunch at a restaurant, sometimes I wrote about different meetings I had. Well, I just went back and I knew exactly, oh, this was at Monk McQueen's in Vancouver at 1:30 on such and such a date. So, I had all that, and then I just kind of had to wing it. I'm a first-time author, and I planned out the chapters, and then I kind of went from there. Also, just so you know, when I first did this, I just wanted my kids, who were pretty young at the time, in 2013, when I just started had an idea, and then I put it away for many years. But I thought, well, if I don't write this down, they'll never know what their dad did. So that's why I did it.
Yes, it's like leaving a legacy, right? And so your children be able to refer back to it. But how does it feel to finally write your memoir?
That's a great question. It was liberating. It was fun. It was daunting. It was painstaking, and it was even therapeutic. I mean, it was weird. I did not expect to have all those different emotions, Christine, and it depended on what I was writing about at the time. But it was really kind of nice to get it. And you mentioned in, introing that question, to have the legacy. And yes, it started for my kids, but I mean, I quickly knew that 30 years being the trailblazer, the one who started it all in Vancouver, there should be a permanent record. So years from now, people can, at least if they want to, they can look back and say, how did that all start? It's so commonplace now. Media has changed even since the last few years, but it was so commonplace. But when we started in 1984, no cell phones, no emails, no fax machine, no social media. It was just myself and a guest on the phone board, and we did it every night, and somehow it grew and grew.
Yeah, so it started in 1984, October 15th on CJOR. And tell
Right.
us the journey. Like, you went from there to, well, I mean, Rock 101 FM, but you started on AM. Was there challenging to AM to FM?
Well, that's a great question, and nobody's asked me that yet because, as much as our show was groundbreaking in the way that people are talking about in 1984, what happened is 5 years later, CJOR changed formats. They went from all talk to rock and roll music. Later, they would tell me that they should have kept me because I was in their demographic, that what they were trying to keep. But they torched everybody in one day. 65 of us lost our job in one day. And I was fortunate to have 4 offers within 3 days. And at that moment, I'm going, whoa. And at that time, I chose CKWX over CKNW, which a lot of people say, how can you turn down CKNW? But I did, because why? CKWX said I could keep my time slot. And it was so important to me to come on after the games and be on late at night, so I could form that relationship with my audience. The material was fresh. But anyway, so CKNW, they wanted me, but they had really a heritage show in that time slot, and they couldn't, and I didn't think they should, move the gentleman named Jack Cullen. For 4 decades, he had a tremendous show called The Owl Prowl. But CKNW wanted me, and they kept coming at me when I was at CKWX. I was approached 4 times in 1 year, and I said to myself, boy, if I don't say yes soon, they're never going to come back. But they came to me with an idea. They said, we can't put you on CKNW, but we can put you on the FM, on CFMI. Now, Christine, that's where the groundbreaking is, because there was no talk show in Canada, Monday through Friday, a regular talk show on the FM airwaves. FM was for music. That's what it was for, not talk. But we did it, and I have to say, of my 30 years, the years I had at CFMI were my happiest and most fun.
Wow. Who were your listeners?
Well, we built it up. They were Canucks fans, I would think, at first, and then sports fans, because, the name is Sports Talk, and yes, we could talk Canucks 12 months a year. But the great thing about being first and only in those days is that in those early Sports Talk years, I could take a break from the Canucks, and I could go to the BC Lions, and I could go to high school basketball or local golf. And I knew people wouldn't be turning off the radio because I was the only one on the radio talking sports. Now, in later years, when competition, started coming, I couldn't afford to say, okay, we're going to not talk about the Vancouver Canucks now. We're going to, next 20 minutes is going to be on the high school volleyball championships or something. You could hear the radios clicking away. I wanted to do more of that, but it's a business where you are rated by, how many are listening, and you need to keep that moving.
Mm-hmm. Now, the title, was the title easy to come up for your memoir?
Well, Pleasant Good Evening is how I started every show. And that just happened the first day. I was nervous as all could be on October 15, 1984. And I write about that in the book. I mean, I was terrified. My throat was so dry, and my hands were shaking, and this music's playing. I just had my 24th birthday, and but the words came out, and the first ones that came out was pleasant good evening. I was stuttering, or I probably didn't stutter, but you know what I mean. I was really nervous. And then I used that the next night and the next night and every night after that for 30 years. I know the second Monday I was on, I was kind of amazed that I was still on the air 1 week later, because it's so young and so green. And I remember saying, pleasant good evening. Welcome to the Monday night edition of Sports Talk. Tonight, we start week number 2 in the history of our show. Well, I did that every Monday for 30 years, and so I would say this is week number 655 in the long, whatever it happened to be. I kept the journal, as I told you.
Yes, and I can't even fathom how many highlights you've absorbed, 30 years of a popular talk show. Can you share with the audience some of the highlights?
Well, my highlights in many ways were the audience's highlights, especially, you go to June 15, 1994. That was the day of Game 7 of the Vancouver Canucks and New York Rangers. And that series and that season, that springtime was the peak so far in Vancouver Canucks history. Some might say 2011 was similar, and it was. I just would say 94 was more special. So that was the Canucks peak, but it was also Sports Talk's peak. And during that run, Christine, I was with the team home and away. So everywhere they went, I was there. Game nights, off nights, and somehow the momentum just built because the province was so excited. And, we became the gathering point for Canuck fans. And, it was a lot of fun. We had different characters. We had the guys in the Canuck mobile. We had Miss Duracell phoning. We had Ranger Smith. I mean, all these characters and the phones. And in the foreword of the book, I write the pinnacle of the night of Game 7. I go 7 hours after Game 7 from until 5 a.m. Pacific time, which was 8 a.m. from New York City. And I write in the beginning of the book that the last call I took just before 5 a.m., the caller comes on and says, Dan, I've been trying since 10 o'clock to get in. And I finally got a phone line. And I said, wow. And then I thought, as I wrote in the book, this caller is on, and the Vancouver Canucks team airplane has already touched down at YVR. So I'm still talking about the game they played, and they've already landed back in Vancouver.
Oh my goodness. Wow. I mean, it's like, you've had so many guests, great guests, but is there one guest that I guess would, stand out?
Well, Bobby Orr was the reason that I loved hockey. I saw him on Hockey Night in Canada as a rookie, and that's maybe a second-year Boston Bruin in the late '60s. Christine, I was the perfect age when the Vancouver Canucks were granted a National Hockey League franchise. I just turned 10 years old. So the entire history of the team is in my heart and in my head. I've seen it from day one. I was at their very first victory, October 11, 1970. And so, I can weave through their entire time. I loved talking to members of those early Canucks, that they were like boyhood idols. My biggest idol was Jim Robson, the play-by-play voice of the Vancouver Canucks. So every time I had him on the show, and he came on several times, I pinched myself. I go, what? I'm talking to Jim Robson. This is like the Vin Scully of Vancouver. He's just, and for me, one of the huge reasons I'm in broadcasting was because of Jim Robson. Bobby Orr played for that Boston Bruins team. The first time I had him on, he came on 3 times. We were at the restaurant, the Fog and Suds, and it was a remote. Brian Burke, a weekly guest, to talk about him because he was hugely important for the show. But Brian Burke arranged for Bobby Orr to be with us at the Fog and Suds, and we sold tickets for charity, $10 and first come, first serve. So you had to get your seating. You had to phone a week before to get a ticket, but then you had to get to the restaurant early to get a proper seat. Well, I was told our show started at 10 p.m. The restaurant was jam-packed at 5 in the afternoon, 5 hours before Bobby Orr arrived.
Wow. So, Dan, what drives you? Your passion for sports broadcasting began when you were young. I understand your dad built you a studio, but what drives you to be, you went from a popular talk show host to now an author. Tell us what keeps you so motivated?
Well, I love the way you phrased that question, because a lot of people, I think, mistakenly think I'm a sports fan that happened to have a radio show. But it's the exact opposite. I'm a broadcaster first, and I like to think I'm a skilled broadcaster who worked at his craft. And I also like to think that if I wasn't doing a sports show, I could be doing another kind of show, and it might have been close to or as equally successful. I just know that my craft, having studied the big boys, I mentioned Jim Robson, Larry King was a huge influence, especially when he was on radio, mutual radio. I used to, as a teenager, get his signal coming in from the States, and unbeknownst to my parents, I would be up till 2, 3 in the morning studying how he conducted talk show. Vin Scully, of course, but there's a lot of them I would listen to, and I would recommend to the young people who want to get into the industry that the best broadcasters are the best listeners. You've got to find out who's good and what makes them good. And conversely, even people who aren't necessarily good, you got to try to study that and think, well, where are they making their mistakes? How could I correct that to make sure I don't, go down that same road? So there's a lot to be learned about listening. And so, yeah, I like sports. I love sports, but I was never cheering for the game. I was always cheering for the show.
Yes, and it's sort of like, it's learning like Larry King. I guess his style, like he's a good interviewer, right? And research. I think what you've done is done a lot of research, like recording every show. So you knew that one day you'd be writing a memoir, and I'm so glad. And I know people who are watching the show will be like, wow. So what can you share, some information that people can find in your book, like any special moments or any turbulent times or
Well, the Brian Burke chapters are going to probably generate the most attention from this book. Brian and I had, I would say, 3 chapters of our relationship. Chapter 1 was really good. Chapter 2 was really bad. And chapter 3 was really just fine. It was okay. Distant, and that was okay. But in the early part of the show, I mean, he joined in 1987, the Vancouver Canucks. We were 3 years in. But I invited him the day he was introduced by the Vancouver Canucks general manager, Pat Quinn. I was at the news conference, and I said, Brian, will you come on the show? He said, yeah, I'll come on tonight. And so he was in the studio. It was a Wednesday night. At the end of the show, off the air, I said to him, Brian, that was terrific. That's refreshing. I've never heard anybody in management talk the way you do, so honestly, so passionately, so, loyally. And I said, it would be great if you could come on more often. And he says to me, I'll come on every week. I said, every week? And I didn't think he meant that. Well, he was on the next Wednesday, and for the next 5 years, he never missed 12 months a year. I mean, no matter where he was, he would never miss. It became appointment radio. So those were early days, and they were great days. And Brian left the Canucks. He went and became a general manager elsewhere, and then joined the National Hockey League. And then it got turbulent because he wanted to come back. And at that point, I think he wanted me to support him more. I tried to, but I didn't want to be influenced too much. You can't step over that journalistic line. And then when he got here, because that was okay, but then he got here, and then it got sour in a hurry because there were ideas that he had that he thought I should be doing on the show, and I got my backup, and he got his backup, and well, that's all in the book. So I could go on and on, but it was turbulent. Fortunately, the happy ending of that is it was him who kind of resurrected it and got our relationship back on track. But it was tough. It was a really difficult time.
Yes. And what would you want people to take away from your book?
Well, I guess take away the fact that, we tried hard every night, that we tried to, we feel we set a bar. I used to have a producer meeting. I only had one producer. So my producer and I, after every show, 12 midnight, we would sit down, and literally about a minute after the show, the first thing is we would say, well, how would you rate that? We gave a score for every show. Don't ask me why, but out of 10, and we often came, oh, that was a 6. Oh, that was a 7, 7.5. Only one time did we push past 9. And that was in 1994 during that Canucks run. So then a minute after that, we'd say, okay, what are we doing tomorrow? What's on tomorrow? And the point I make about that, Christine, is the fact that they just kept coming. The shows just kept coming, and we had to be ready because the bar, in my mind, had been set to a high level that we couldn't afford to rest on our laurels. And as a result, and I say this somewhere in the book, after it was all over, the one regret I had was I don't think I enjoyed it enough going along the way because we were always so preoccupied with the next one. And then I retired, and it wasn't until I started this book that I started, we actually did do quite a lot. We actually, because I never really had the time and or inclination to think about it until this book. But that's the thing. And overall, I think people to stick with things, to do things. This book is a great example. I could have given up a long time ago. It's the most daunting thing I've ever done in my career was write this book and stay with it because it is amazing. Christine, I interviewed more book authors than any broadcaster in Canada, and I had no idea how hard it was to write a book.
Yes, I mean it's unbelievable. But you started like 60 minutes. Like the show grew like in length. So
Yeah.
Much more research, much more preparation. How did you do it?
Yeah. Well, we were 12, 14 hours a day, to be honest. I'd get up, before I was married, I used to say I got up at the crack of noon, but I mean, it became earlier, 10 or 11, and, a bowl of cereal, and we're right at it. And talking to my producer all day, what's in the news, what's topical. We had a grid always set up where we slotted in our regular guests, Brian Burke, Rod Beaton, Harry Neal, whoever it happened to be. So we had that foundation to build our show around. And then we'd wake up and we'd start planning. I had a home studio, which was something I put in my contract because of the time zones. I can't, you want to get an Eastern guest at 10 o'clock at night, they're not going to come on at 1 a.m. Some did, but not, regular. So I needed a studio at home to pre-record and edit and get those interviews ready for the show. And then I would start writing, the formation of an editorial through the afternoon and take a lunch break or something like that. And I get into the studio again prior to getting married. It got a little later as I had family dinners, but I get in about 6 or 7 in the evening, and and then the games were all on. We'd watch all the games and take notes about the game. Then we're on a suit. Now that was the hardest part. The Canucks game would end, and we were on within minutes, sometimes right away. And so you had to come good at formulating your thoughts and taking notes along the way. And then midnight would come, we go, we're done, and then have our meeting, and then go and finally eat dinner after midnight. I mean, it was like, that was our routine.
Yes, and never rest on your laurels. Like you had no time. It's
No,
like as
no.
you said. But you also were a writer for the Vancouver Sun.
Yes. And
Yeah,
that was
so
hard. I found that the hardest thing to do in my career. And so now I've written a book and like, wow. But, the book came easier because I was writing about myself. Whereas in the Sun, I would be staring at this screen all day and this blank screen. And I'm going, man, this is going to reach the Vancouver Sun readership. And how am I going to write something that's interesting for people? And I would start and then delete and start and delete. It was taxing. It was daunting. And I honestly and I was okay at it. I wasn't bad. I saved the columns. I've looked at them. But I'm not the columnist that some of those are. It was good to do. It was a great experience, but it felt kind of also good when it came to an end, to be honest. It wasn't my complete strength.
yes, but did it help though? Like your path to writing a memoir?
Yes, I would say it did. When you write for radio, it's way different. I mean, you're springing your thoughts, right? And it's, a bang and a bang and a bang. And the book, people have already read it, not many because it's just coming, but a couple of the comments I've heard is I can hear your voice when I'm reading the book. I can hear your voice. And that's a pretty nice compliment.
Oh.
So the sentence structure, I tried to not be quite like the radio, but I don't want it to be it. I'm obviously not Shakespearean. So somewhere, is my style. And that's what it is. You have to read it and then judge for yourself. I don't really know. I can't speak to that,
Yeah.
but I like the fact people say they hear my voice. I think the book weaves very well. I think the stories flow. So I'm really proud of that part of it. And I would just say that, the whole thing, though daunting, it was because I'm writing about myself as opposed to the Vancouver Sun stuff. It wasn't. It just kind of poured out of me, if you know what I mean.
Yes, and as you said, like it's therapeutic, right? As you said earlier, and and so where can people pick up a copy of your book?
So thank you. It's on Amazon. Amazon has it, and I have a website too, danrussellsportstalk.com, and you can read a lot about the books, but also there's some old turn back the tapes, and I've done something called Memoir Moments where I have a couple minutes on different topics that I'm going to be posting regularly. But Amazon is the first place you can get it. I think that expands later. The one thing is that, and again, I didn't know any of this, but when they put it on Amazon, they just put the paperback and the ebook. There is a hardcover coming. I thought it would all be out there at the same time, but the hardcover apparently takes another week or two to show up on Amazon. So if people want a hardcover, they have to wait a little longer, and then get that keepsake, hopefully.
Yes, and you might have a book launch, maybe, sign, autograph, and I think people would really like that.
I've heard a lot of people already asking me, will you sign your book? Will you sign my book? Will you sign my book? And I'm going, wow. I would actually be nervous. I think if I picked up the pen and I started signing, like, I don't want to mess up their book. Like I would say, well, okay, what is your name? And I go, Christine. Okay, now how do I spell? Okay. And then my penmanship might just ruin their book. So I don't know if I want to do that.
No, I don't think so. But, Dan, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I would like to add that the little things in broadcasting and in life matter, including somebody who might send you a letter a long time ago with a self-addressed stamped envelope. And a person like that really means business. That person might have sent somebody like me a letter saying, I'm interested in broadcasting. Can I shadow you or something along the way? And of course, you know what I'm talking about. But that was impressionable because you took the extra step. The little things matter. And that was a lot of years ago. And I saved that letter. And here you are, you're doing what you wanted to do when you first reached out to me many years ago.
Oh, Dan, thank you so much. I mean, you are, memoir, you're a pioneer, you have this memoir, you are a role model, and you are BCIT alumni too. So
you're very kind. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I know it's late there, so
no problem. This is so enjoyable. It's nice to talk to you, and congratulations on your successes too, Christine. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.